My presentation this morning is on wireless troubleshooting. Specifically, I want to talk about the balance between technical and non-technical skill sets for troubleshooting. Now, when I mention non-technical skill sets for troubleshooting, a lot of times people look at me kind of funny because, let's face it, troubleshooting is always thought of as very technical. But I was taught it takes a balance of non-technical and technical skills to really optimize troubleshooting. Okay? So what does this balance look like? Well, on the technical side, you have things like your technical resources, how to access them, how to interpret them and use them, your technical knowledge, your technical experience, and your tools. You got to know how to use your tools, which tools to use and when. And then you have to be able to interpret the data from these tools, not just accept it. On the non-technical side, you have things like your communication skills. Now, this skill I took for granted for a long time when I was first learning to troubleshoot. Your searching and filtering skills, how to find data and filter down to just what you need. Organizational skills. How do we organize our data and present it in a way that's easy for us to analyze? And then our processes. Having a workflow, a repeatable workflow that utilizes all these skill sets together, and then you can use them to address a problem. Now, oftentimes when I talk about troubleshooting, I'm asked, where did I learn to troubleshoot wireless? And for me, a more appropriate question is, where did I learn to troubleshoot? Because I was taught that troubleshooting is a universal skill, and that you learn certain parts of it and you can apply it to any technology. The skill sets I use, I can apply to fixing a car or a washing machine or a wireless network. Now, most of the skills that I use currently to troubleshoot wireless networks, I learned back in 1986, 10 years before 802.11 was even ratified. And I learned them working in a small garage in Virginia Beach called Tier and Rod Automotion. The garage was owned by Terry and Ron Gilbert. And when I walked into the shop, I knew this was a very special place. It wasn't just your average general repair shop. Because Terry and Ron were both very passionate about drag racing. And you might be thinking, what does drag racing and wireless have to do with each other? Well, it took me a long time to convince Ron to let me work for him. And when I did, he gave me 3 rules. The first rule was, in Ron's shop, it's Ron's way. The second rule was, everything you do in this shop is a learning opportunity. I didn't understand this one at first because I was young and naive, but what he meant was the paycheck that was just a bonus. The real value was the information and the skills you're going to walk out of here with. And that was very much proven true. And the third thing is you will do nothing in my shop without a publication or a written procedure in front of you. And like I said, I was young and cocky, and I kind of thought I didn't need training wheels. But this became one of the most important things he ever taught me. And he explained it. He said that cars were complicated things. There's too many moving parts, specifications, different makes and models to be able to memorize everything. And he said you shouldn't try to. He said you need to learn where the information is. Where do you find it? How do you access it? And how do you interpret it? He also told me that your memory is a great tool, but anything that you know or you believe you know should be verified through your technical information, your resources. He said because mistakes happen when you don't know what you don't know, and even bigger mistakes happen when what you believe you know is incorrect. And this made me realize that my approach to learning something was completely wrong. I was focusing on the wrong skill sets. So Ron started to teach me his skill sets and what he thought I needed to work on. The first thing he taught me was active listening. Now, I thought this was kind of a funny skill set for working on cars. How is that going to help me fix them? But he said, most mechanics start troubleshooting way before the customer ever finishes explaining the issue. They're troubleshooting in their head. And therefore, they're not focusing on what the person's saying, and they miss a lot of details. Well, that could definitely be applied to wireless, because I can tell you, I can't count the number of times I catch myself doing that. The next one was learn to listen with perspective. Now, this one really kind of confused me because I knew what perspective was. It's how I viewed things and how other people viewed things, and I understood that they could be different. But how do you listen with perspective? And he said, it's kind of like this. Imagine you have a very brisk 50-degree day, and you ask two people to describe that day to you, but they can't tell you the temperature. Now, one person might be from up in Michigan, up by the Great Lakes, and the other person's from down in Florida. How they describe that day to you is going to be completely different. And if you don't take their perspective into account, you're never going to get an accurate picture of what they're describing. And he said, this goes for the same thing when you're listening to a customer describe an issue to you, because you have to take their perspective into account when you listen to the details of what they're telling you is going on. The third thing was, he said, remain neutral. He said, approach every issue with no predispositions, no biases. Make sure that if you're going to take into account your experience that you might have, make sure you prove it that it is applicable to that issue before you start taking actions or making decisions on it. Now, the fourth one, interpret data. This one here, I thought for sure I was going to get some technical kung fu from him to help me work on cars. But it wasn't. It was actually more valuable than that. He said, learn to decide whether something is a fact or an assumption. He said, because that'll keep your troubleshooting on track. He said, we make decisions or take actions based on facts. We test and verify based on assumptions. He said, you never want to test something or act upon something if it's an assumption, because your troubleshooting may get taken off track. Now, the next, he said, follow a process. Have a repeatable process that works for you. He said, different people are going to have different processes, but if it works for you, then stick to it. Because if you have a process you follow, you'll be able to keep your troubleshooting on track. He said, learn to take notes. Now, this was important because he said, if you remember what he said about memory, it always needed to be verified. He said, if you are troubleshooting a problem and you think to yourself, well, I'll remember that, well, that's most likely the first thing you're going to forget. And so the only way to verify it is if you write it down. So learn what to write down and how to document it quickly. Now, back in the day, we used to use Polaroid cameras to take pictures of things because picture's worth 1,000 words. But now we have cell phones, and we use those all the time, and I use them constantly. If I'm doing a design survey, I'll take out my cell phone, and there's a nice free app called Cardboard Camera, and I'll take a VR picture of an environment, maybe an area of the network that I find challenging. And then if I'm back in my office doing the design and I need to go back to that spot, I can put on my VR headset and I can be immersed back in that environment. So learning how to take notes was a big thing. And then technical resources. Learning what technical resources you have available, how to access them, how to find information quickly, and then how to filter down to just what you need. It was important. Now, I said, interpret the data was one of the most important things that he taught me, because this will help you in guiding your troubleshooting. I want to take a very oversimplified troubleshooting scenario and kind of walk through it. Let's say we have an issue reported, and the issue is slow wireless performance, or poor wireless performance, slow throughput, and application timeouts. I can make a really quick, simple table and start to collect my data points. Now let's say I'm given 4 data points. Slow throughput, it's happening to all applications, all wireless clients, and it's intermittent and simultaneous. Now, some people ask me, why do I put simultaneous after intermittent? And it's, for me, I have to determine if an issue is intermittent, but its effect is simultaneous across all the devices it's affecting. That's different than if it's intermittent and independently affecting devices randomly. So let's say we classify all these and we say they are all facts. We've proven them, they are all facts. We can analyze this data and start looking at where might we look for troubleshooting? Where might we focus in on? With this, knowing that it's all applications and all wireless clients, the first thing I'm going to do is look at the data path for the clients. And I'm going to find out what devices are common to all the wireless clients. And then I might also look at the wired data path and see what is not common because they aren't having issues. So with this, I can zoom in and really narrow the scope of my troubleshooting. But let's say we take those same 4 data points and we classify just one of them as an assumption. Well, that could dramatically change where we're going to start troubleshooting. Because maybe during our verification of that, we find out it's actually not all wireless clients, it's only all wireless clients on a certain floor. Well, then we might be looking at maybe an edge switch or a distribution router. Probably not going to look at RF right away, because if it's all clients on a certain floor, they're going to be using different channels, possibly different spectrums. Maybe we find out it's all wireless clients on a specific AP. Again, that's going to be a completely different looking troubleshooting scenario, just by classifying one thing as an assumption. Now, another way of limiting or reducing our troubleshooting scope is by using 50-50 questions, and I'm sure you're all probably familiar with them. And I use them in a very similar way. Get a basic idea of the issue, and then I start asking the questions about the clients, the simple, non-technical questions. Is it happening to a single or multiple client? And if the answer is multiple clients, then we have to decide, is it happening to some or all of the clients? Because that's really going to narrow down our scope. And then if we identify that it's only some clients, then we got to start looking for the lowest common denominator. You know, almost like you did in fractions. We look for what's common: device type, SSID, spectrum. Once we find that commonality, we can start to narrow in and zoom in on where we need our troubleshooting to start. And we can do the same thing with location. One or multiple locations, some or all. Is it constant or intermittent? And again, is it simultaneously affecting our clients, or is it independently affecting our clients? Now, another way that Ron taught me is to organize the data. Get it into groups where you can start looking for commonalities. Doesn't have to be a technical skill. And often, the analogy of troubleshooting is like building a puzzle is used. And it's very much true, because in building a puzzle, you gather the pieces up. You'll take those pieces and separate them out and start to organize them. You'll go through and find the commonalities, find your edge pieces. You do the same thing with troubleshooting. You find your commonalities and start to group them together, and you let the commonalities start to define an issue. And with that, you'll start to make connections and start to solve for the puzzle. And like with a puzzle, you don't have to have every piece in place to be able to be aware of what the picture is. But the more pieces you have, the better the image is going to look, the clearer the picture. Now, to use this analogy and really make it accurate for wireless, we probably would have to change it a little bit and say it'd be more like taking 4 or 5 puzzles, dumping them into a single box, throwing away the picture, and then trying to solve for it. Because most wireless issues are compound issues, and they're just acting upon each other, reducing performance. Now, the nice thing about that analogy, if you think about it, if you were to start pulling those pieces out and separating them and looking at them and looking for commonalities, separate pictures are going to start to appear. And it's the same thing with troubleshooting. And we'll talk a little about the next slide, which is my troubleshooting process. Now, this is a process that I learned and have developed, and it's evolved over the years. But it's a very simple process. 3 words: what, where, and action. The what is simply define the issue. Most troubleshooting I find starts before the issue is ever really truly defined. Document all data points. Now, this is important because going back to the puzzle, as you document all the data points you collect, even the ones that might not seem relevant to the issue you're working, they might find commonalities with other data points. And they might automatically start to define a separate issue on their own that might need to be worked when you're done with the first problem. Small details matter. I can't count the number of times I've been involved in troubleshooting, and a detail was overlooked that could have shortcutted the troubleshooting and saved a lot of time. There's one example of this that I want to share with you. It was a large company. I was troubleshooting a VoIP issue, and it was a big effort troubleshooting this. See, the customer they were deploying a brand new VoIP system, and they had tested it in the lab. They had created the phone configurations, and they created the AP configurations and tested everything, and it worked flawlessly. And then they moved it into production. And when they moved into production, they started to have call drops and disconnects. And they couldn't figure out why. And during the data collection, it was made known that everything was identical to the test environment. The hardware of the phone, the hardware of the APs, the configurations were identical. So they instantly started looking at the one thing that was different: the production environment, the RF. And they spent a lot of time troubleshooting that. And they overlooked one minor detail, and that was, in the test environment, they manually configured the phones, where in the production environment, they used a configuration server. And there was a keep alive coming from that configuration server that was causing the disconnects. Again, a minor detail that was overlooked, but if it had been uncovered, or if that one statement that everything was identical was treated as an assumption and not a fact until it was proven, would have saved a lot of troubleshooting. The last thing is update your issue definition. As troubleshooting evolves, your issue definition should evolve so that you can get a better picture of what you're dealing with. Now, once you have all your data points, you've defined your issue, it's going to start to define where your issue is happening or where you need to go for your next step. Might be where in the network, where in the connection process, or maybe where in the OSI model, or maybe where in the protocol stack. But it's going to define where your next step needs to go. And with those 2 pieces of information, you're going to start to be able to develop action items. Maybe it's recreate the issue, or possibly, go through and start collecting more data or verifying assumptions or testing theories. Now, once I start developing my action items, I'm going to always have one last step in this, and that's a trigger question. And that's how. And if I can't confidently answer how to my action items, how do I do this? That's when I escalate. I bring in additional resources so I can keep troubleshooting moving forward. And that's one thing that Ron was a stickler on, is that asking for help early keeps troubleshooting moving forward. Now, this isn't a one and done, it's a cycle. And you take the results from the action, bring it back over, add it into your issue definition, and you start the cycle all over again until you find your problem. So how does this work? Or again, we're going to take an oversimplified issue. We're going to say that we have problems connecting to the wireless network, and websites are slow to load. Now, this is an issue I worked for a customer. And when we defined the issue, we found devices were slow to connect, websites were slow to load. It was affecting the student and teacher devices in the classrooms. The wireless was 5 gigahertz only. It was intermittent and simultaneous, meaning it was an intermittent problem, but affecting all the devices at the same time. And the devices affected were Chromebooks that were carded and laptops, Windows laptops. Now, my experience would look at this and say, well, carded Chromebooks, that means every time a new user logs in, they got to download their profile, they got to download any local applications, a lot of extra overhead there. So I'm thinking RF capacity issue. And I'm probably thinking that this is probably due to the fact that their capacity requirements have outgrown their current network capacity. But per the way I learned, we stay the course. We go through the process. We add our information in and we interpret the data and classify it. We classify most of it as facts that we can make decisions on, and one assumption. We add this into our troubleshooting, and we can add the one thing is the assumption. Now, based on our data that we collected, our issue definition, and our assumption, we can make some decisions. Where do we need to look? Well, we know it's happening in the classroom, and it's happening in the 5 gigahertz spectrum. And what's our action going to be? Well, we're going to test the assumption. So we'll add that in. And how are we going to do that? We're going to use a spectrum analysis and an off-air capture. Now, I put the off-air capture in there because even if the spectrum analysis shows me high channel utilization, I'm going to want to come back and figure out what was driving that channel utilization. And I'm not going to want to rerun that test. When we did this, it was interesting because the results were not what I expected. Peak channel utilization was only about 75%, which didn't match the symptoms. So I documented the results of this and took a look at the packet captures. And in the packet capture, we did see an anomaly. We saw that from a specific device type, we noted that we had unusually high duration values, which meant the device was reserving a lot more airtime than it needed and then what it was using. So took this information, added it back into our troubleshooting process. We remove what we don't need. We remove the assumption. We add in that we know it's no longer an RF capacity issue. We know that we have device types with high duration values. And now we can redefine our where and create a new assumption. And from there, we can develop new actions. And again, this will cycle down. Now, I'm not going to take you through the whole rest of this process, but you get the idea. The root cause of this actually was the client device, a specific device, was having a problem with the way it was handling AMPDU. But what's more important than the root cause is the fact of the different skill sets that we use to get to this. We followed a process. We used communication skills to gather information about the network design, configurations, the environment, and the issue. We documented and organized our data points so that we could easily analyze them and quickly look at stuff. We used our technical skills to analyze the data. We remained neutral. We didn't act on our first assumption that it was a capacity issue. And it would have been very easy to act on that and just decide that, well, maybe if we increase our channel width or make a change to the configuration. We set up data collection. We utilized specific tools to collect what we needed. And we analyzed and verified our results. We used a balance of technical and non-technical skills that, in my opinion, optimized troubleshooting. And as I was taught, both these skill sets are things we need to develop to really, really optimize our troubleshooting skill sets. So I'm going to leave you with two last thoughts. And they are quotes from Ron Gilbert. Ron told me a long time ago that great mechanics never limit themselves. They will utilize skill sets from all life experiences and adapt them to address new challenges. Now, if you just substitute in wireless troubleshooters for mechanics, it applies across the board. The last thing Ron always told me, he said, dare to dream, because that's how you reach your goals. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and look forward to the rest of the conference.